Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm so happy you're here. This is in my Rant series, where I share my opinions and critiques of essentially the authoritarianism that is so pervasive in many of our systems, whether it's government, parenting, religion, education, criminal justice. Today, I'm going to talk about the medical system. And I might take my glasses off because I'm seeing a glare there. Um, I have been wanting to make this video about my own experience of medical trauma and some of my critiques of the medical system for a long time now, but I had a lot of parts with fear and concern around it for various reasons. And I'm very committed to not doing anything until my whole system is on board, right? It's like that slowest child on the hike, right? The self stays back with the slowest child. So I really wanted to meet their concerns. So why am I able to make this video now? Well, there's a member of our weekly IFS community, which meets every Tuesday at 1 o'clock from 1 to 2:30 Central Time. If you are interested in joining a community of people where we learn about IFS, we do IFS experiences, exercises, work with our parts, speak for our parts. You can look up my website, theordinarysacred.com, and find more information about that. There's open enrollment. But one of the members there shared this tool with us. It's called IFS Buddy, and it's essentially an AI bot that helps facilitate an IFS session. And as many of you know, if you've seen a lot of my videos, I am able to do a lot of IFS work inside on my own already, which I've heard is rare. But this tool is actually really helpful in some people in the group were worried, understandably, with AI and the implications of that. And I was telling them that for me, it's like a self-like part, which essentially reflects back, mimics, almost pretends to be self, but it shows the parts the way to the self. It becomes like a bridge to our actual self. So whether we're working with a bot that's been trained by other people's selves, or we're working with a therapist or a coach or a peer, our self is still always the healing agent, right? So we are still always our own authority, and we can question anyone in front of us and access our own self energy. But it's just like using a hammer. It's a tool, right? I don't imagine this happened, but say way back when people would pound in a nail with their hand, and then suddenly they realize, oh, there's a hammer. I can use this and use less effort and get a better effect, right? And I think tools like that are really helpful because then it allows our energy to be freed up to do even higher order things, right? So anyway, this video is not an endorsement for IFS Buddy, just wanting to explain why I find it to be a really helpful tool. Because it connects my parts to myself, and myself is the one who provides the healing, the wisdom, the compassion, all that. So anyway, I went on IFS Buddy and I decided to use the trailhead of the parts that are all active around me sharing my story of medical trauma. And so I'm going to tell you what happened with them, what their concerns are and everything as an illustration, right, of the IFS process. I told the bot, I have these parts around it, and it directed me to get to know one of the parts. And I said, there are many parts. And it eventually led me through some polarization work, which was really beautiful. And the first part was the one who just really wants to share my story. And it said, I'm afraid, or the reason why I want to share is because I want other people to avoid the pain and suffering and struggle that I had to go through in the medical system. So it has very beautiful intention. And the parts that had concerns and were worried about it said, no, 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 you can't tell your story, because they were afraid of being misunderstood, being judged. And they showed me how in the past, many years ago, my sister had her gallbladder out. And I remember there was a family that she went to church with that was telling her, oh, no, you don't need to do that. Your body can heal. And I remember I thought they were crazy at the time. So that part is kind of projecting. Like, people are going to think you're crazy if you question the medical system, the way things are, right? If you trust in the body too much, you're going to, they're fearful that you're going to encourage people to harm themselves in that way. And I relate to that because I had parts who felt that way too. And then there was everything that happened in 2020 and 2021 around medical autonomy of our bodies. And there was so much fear at that time. And fear often makes people act out, right, in violence and make threats of other people because they're so afraid of the choices they're making. And so I had parts who were afraid of that. But eventually the parts who wanted to share, and those parts came together and said, it's okay to share. One, knowing that my self understands me. And if others misunderstand, it's okay. And two, just really being clear that this is my experience. This is my personal experience, and I am not speaking for you. And I'm definitely not saying you shouldn't have the choice to follow the medical system, to trust the medical system. I'm not trying to even vilify doctors and nurses or anything like that, or even medications. I'm just sharing my experience of awakening to my own empowerment, and that I am my own authority, that I am essentially an experiment of one. I like that phrase, that maybe what works for other people or what my doctors say, very well meaning, is not the right thing for me. And it's okay for me to question. It's okay for me to listen to my body and to make my choices. And in the same way, I would want to empower you to do the same thing, even if that looks very different or opposite to the choices that I make. So I'll move kind of into my own story. The part that wanted to share, I asked that part, what do you want to share? And it showed me these three distinct images that represented these three distinct periods in my life. And the first one was kind of this before, where the word it is using is blindly or naively, but I very much just trusted doctors and medicine. I believed that they had the answers. They were essentially saviors, right? That if I had a problem, I could go in, they would tell me what it was, what the problem was, and then they would solve it, right? They would give me a medicine, a procedure, something to support me. And so that was pre-2017. And then there's 2017, 2018, which is this middle period of complete disillusionment, confusion, helplessness, hopelessness, where I was going through medical trauma. And then, like I've said, the third section was where I came into my own empowerment. And I went from kind of surrendering and releasing them as the savior and allowed them to be human, and said, actually, no, there's more wisdom and authority in my own body and in my own experience, and I can trust that, which was just really hopeful and empowering, like I said. So during those 2 years, I'm not going to go through every detail. That would take a really, really long time. But essentially, in August of 2017, it's hard to tell you without telling you what I know it was now. I guess I'll just say that. But know that it was almost 2 years before I understood what had happened to me that day. So essentially, I had a big panic attack. There were a lot of really stressful things in my life converging. And what it felt like to me, though, in that moment was, I am dying. I don't understand. I've never felt this way before. Um, I don't understand why I'm dying, but it feels certain to me, absolutely certain, that I am dying right now. So I called my husband. He rushed home from work, took me into the ER. My body was shaking uncontrollably. And I just remember feeling so frantic, like they need to help me. They need to help me. I'm dying. I'm dying. Why aren't they helping me? Um, and fast forward, they ended up hospitalizing me for several days, saying that I had sepsis and pumping me full of antibiotics. And then I went home. I started to recover. But then a huge stressor came into our lives. At that point, our house was flooded during Hurricane Harvey. And I began to have the same experience that I had had a few weeks before. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is happening again. I'm dying again. And I would have such a collapse response, or I would have this, I'm dying, I'm dying. And then my body would go into such collapse that it felt like it's dying. And, my husband is trusting, or trying to support me. So he rushes me in flooding down, luckily there were streets that got to the hospital. We went in, I'm hospitalized again, pumped full of antibiotics again, a lot of invasive, really painful procedures. They're trying to figure out what's happening, right? So essentially, I'll say here that the doctors were trying to do their job. They were doing what they do, which is to find a purely physical cause which is understandable. Something's happening physically. There must be a physical root cause. So one of my biggest complaints, I'll say here, is that the medical system does not have an understanding of the mind-body connection, that the mind and body are one, and that stress and trauma and anxiety and fear can cause very, very real physical symptoms. And so when they're constantly looking for the physical root and treating that, they're missing the actual root, and thus, in essence, perpetuating a problem. So it's really about, in this case, the naivete or the ignorance of this mind-body experience, which I've since met thousands of people who've had the same experience as I have. And even diagnoses that are given, there are so many diagnoses that are given that essentially mean that anything that where the doctor is saying we don't really know what causes it and there is no cure is likely a mind-body, has a root in the mind. And so those are things like everything from fibromyalgia to chronic fatigue to lupus, a lot of autoimmune conditions, arthritis, even MS. And it can be, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, like a lot of digestive issues, chronic migraines, TMJ, back pain. And some of these things might start with a physical, well, and they are manifesting physically. It's not saying you're making it up in your mind. It's not actually there. It is there. It is manifesting physically. And some of them, like maybe back pain or knee pain or something like that, has been caused by a structural issue. But after a certain amount of time, the body will heal. And so if the pain continues, that means it is actually a mind-body issue. So I didn't understand that at all then. So I'm just trusting that the doctors are going to find the physical. I believe the same as them. They're going to find the physical root, right? But of course they didn't. And so they're grasping at straws and they're like, well, her lactic acid is high. I think maybe she's septic. But the body's response to immense stress and trauma and anxiety is for the lactic acid to go high, right? Our mind and body are not separate. They really are just connected, the same thing. So that happened, and then we were displaced. We were living with another family. It was very, very stressful for my system. I was essentially bedridden. I had insomnia for several months, could not sleep. It was absolutely torturous. And then I'm being given all kinds of medications, which had really big side effects for me. So after a while, I didn't know what was actually from the original thing and what am I experiencing from all these medications? What are the side effects? I had all kinds of bladder pain, vaginal pain, really intense abdominal pain, which I believe was wounds in my, I know, I will say it was wounds in my intestines, created by so much antibiotic use that just totally killed my gut microbiome, which then destroyed my immune system essentially. And it was taking resources that would go for me to rest and digest, right? And so, and because of the flood and the fear around all these unsolvable medical problems, my adrenaline is high. I'm in fight or flight constantly. So I'm not in rest and digest. I cannot sleep. At that time, I didn't know IFS yet, but my hypervigilant parts were just on all the time. And I didn't have a felt sense of safety, except what was really interesting. Again, I started putting puzzle pieces together back then. The only thing that would help me sleep at night was my husband rubbing my back. And I now understand it was because it was a physical signal of safety, comfort, warmth. And my system, that's what my system needed. It needed to feel safe. And then it could relax enough to go to sleep. However, before that, before I recovered, I had another hospital stay. I actually went to the ER 11 times because this whole time, within I think a year and a half, the whole time I kept thinking the medical system is the savior. They're the ones who are going to help me. I have to go there every time I feel like I'm dying. They're going to save me. And I had to be shown differently over and over and over. But the third time I had excruciating pain. It was level 10. It was worse than when I gave birth twice naturally without medication. It was unbearable. And so the last time I went in for 6 days and they pumped me full of morphine, and that was the only thing that helped me not have pain. And then eventually, and we won't go into, but I had gone to the ER the day before and they had done a procedure in my uterus to check. And I believe that's what actually caused the injury that caused my pain. And then as I was in the hospital, that went away. But then, they come in at every hour or two and they say, what's your pain level? And they give you more morphine kind of thing. And I started explaining, I don't have the same pain. I have a different pain now. And now it's about a 7. And that was in my intestines. And so then they did all kinds of other tests and everything. And again, they're trying to get to the root. They just don't have the comprehensive view, understanding of this is not just physical. So anyway, I end up leaving. They want me to wait until I'm out of pain to leave. But I had a part that said, I don't want to be addicted to morphine. I don't want to be addicted to painkillers. I've got to leave even before I'm out of pain. And luckily, the painkiller they gave me didn't work. But I did have I gained such incredible insight and empathy for people who do get addicted to painkillers or to anything. When you are in that much pain, you will do anything to get it to go away. And then I had to go through withdrawals of the painkiller, even just having it for 6 days. Didn't sleep. I had to have the support of my parents, flew in from California to take care of my kids. My husband had off work to take care of me. So if someone has to, go through withdrawals and get off of some of these medications that are addictive, they need so much support around them during a period of time. For me, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks. And then eventually I was able to learn some mind-body techniques of observing the pain in my body. And as I began to watch it with curiosity and without fear, without trying to fix it or figure it out, just observing it curiously, I was like, oh, it's like food or gas or whatever is like going through my intestine, and there are certain spots that I can notice very specifically, here and here and here. And every time anything goes by it, it goes, ow. It's like it's touching a wound, a cut inside, right? And so I was able to essentially diagnose myself by observing. And of course, when I went to um, the doctors, that I went to so many specialists, and it was awful because I felt so terrible all the time. I wasn't getting sleep, and yet I had to get up and try to get to all these doctor's appointments. I always had to have someone take me because I couldn't drive for about a year. But I remember going in, and the gastroenterologist had these pamphlets that were all about colonoscopy and endoscopy. So I was like, okay, that's the business here. And by that time I was starting to question things and starting to trust my body more. And so I remember going in, and of course, like I would have predicted, the gastroenterologist said, you need to have a colonoscopy and an endoscopy. I was like, of course. And so I asked, I said, and so if I choose not to, is there any alternative? This was something I never would have asked a doctor before. And so I never would have even known that I could ask that question. And he said, oh yeah, there's actually this barium enema, I think that's what it was, that is less invasive than the others. I said, oh, that is so fascinating. Because I've heard of many, many people who have actually been injured and harmed through some of these invasive procedures. And I know that my body is so incredibly sensitive, and I really didn't want to harm it beyond how it was already harmed. So at that time, I also began seeing a naturopath who had his own issues, we'll talk about. But he was this real turning point of looking more holistically at what foods am I consuming? Am I feeling safe? Am I getting outside and getting fresh air and sunlight? Am I getting movement? Am I taking care of my thoughts and maybe meditating or just caring for myself in these ways? So I met with a nutritionist and changed my diet. But of course, then he prescribed $200 a month or something of supplements. So I just transferred my authority from the allopathic medical doctors now to the naturopath. But one of the great things that he said, though, was, and I absolutely believe this now, that about 90% of what we go to doctors for, we don't need to. 10%, yes, we do. We break a bone, we get a big cut, we need to be, stitched up, or there are things where we absolutely benefit from going to the hospital or the doctor. But there are so many things where we don't need to. So I had this propensity that every time I felt essentially was having a panic attack, now I understand, I would go to the ER. And he said, see if you can lay in your bed, let your husband hold you while you're shaking, and breathe, tell yourself soothing messages, rest if you can, and wait 1 hour, and then see how you feel. And if you still feel awful, go to the ER. And some people might say, oh, that's irresponsible. What if you're having a heart attack? What if? But because I had so many experiences having the same thing, going to the ER, them telling me nothing's wrong or diagnosing something and creating more problems, I said, okay, I'm going to try this. And then every time within an hour, I would feel better. And it was amazing to learn in my system that I would literally feel like I am going to die. And it felt like being reborn. It felt like, wow, I escaped death again, Oh my goodness. And so I began to have less fear of when these panic attacks would come on. And now I understand a lot more about perimenopause and hormone levels and low blood sugar, and lots of different things that can cause these panic attacks. But none of this, perimenopause was not mentioned once when I went to all kinds of gynecologist appointments. Low blood sugar wasn't mentioned, none of it. So it was actually my parts that told me when I went inside that that was an issue. And sure enough, when I started eating more protein and supporting my hormone balance, working with parts that drove me to go beyond my capacity so that I could say no more and have less stress in my life, so that my hormone, my mother hormone, wasn't going to adrenaline and cortisol, it could go to estrogen or progesterone. The issues stopped. And it was my parts who explained that to me. It's this my parts, if you watch my video on I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically going into my body, and I list 15 or 16 different issues where I went into my body and asked my parts and myself to explain what was happening in my body. And in this case, it showed me a triangle as an image, and it was anxiety was at the top, and then at the bottom there was blood sugar, low blood sugar, and hormone imbalance. And it was saying they're all very connected. And whenever you support one, you support the other, or the other two, right? So if you're doing things to lower your stress level, maybe it was stress at the top, it lowers your anxiety, and then it helps your blood sugar and your hormone balance. When you eat to support your hormone balance, it helps the other two. When you eat to support your blood sugar, it helps the other two. And again, my parts explained this to me. And it was absolutely right, because when I went in and did what, supported those things, the issues resolved. So yeah, there were so many issues like that. Then with the naturopath, I'll finish kind of that story. I started having, after several months on the supplements, I started having new symptoms where I had double vision. I couldn't see straight. I couldn't see clearly. For several months, I was incredibly weak and fatigued and couldn't barely walk. And so I went to the ER, I went to the allopathic doctor, I went to the naturopath. No one could tell me what was wrong with me. So that's the moment when I really surrendered. And I said, I have to figure this out myself. And I sat on my couch for 3 days. I mean, I did go to the bathroom and eat and go to bed, but I essentially just observed my body. And I asked the parts of me, I didn't know IFS yet, but I essentially asked the figured out thinking parts to rest and just let me observe curiously without judgment. And I did that, and I did that. And I did look over in my mind's eye, what changes I had made and what I was doing. And I remember it was like a light bulb moment. They talk about it was a clarity. It was this is a result of an accumulation of a vitamin that I am taking. I knew it without a shadow of a doubt. I got up off that couch. I went over and because I just blindly trusted the naturopath. I didn't look at any of the ingredients, right? So I start reading them and looking them up, and I see that I'm taking exorbitant amounts of several vitamins. I remember vitamin A and E were in there, and some others. So at that point, that's when I started to go into Google, and I enlisted my Google researcher part instead of enlisting that part first, right? I observed everything for a long period of time. And then once I had clarity, I went to Google with direction. And I said, what are the symptoms of a vitamin E overdose, vitamin A overdose, etc.? And sure enough, I had every symptom of a vitamin A overdose. And it said it's fat soluble, so it'll take a couple weeks to get out of your system, but you just need to completely take away all sources or supplements of vitamin A. So I did that, and sure enough, in 2 weeks, I was back to myself again. And that was kind of the final push. And since then, whenever I have any kind of physical ailment, I will go inside and spend that time observing without judgment, trusting my body, talking to my body. What do you need? What do you want me to know? And I am an experiment of one, right? And I can advocate for myself. And this doesn't mean that I don't get information. For example, I was going to say from experts, but I'm my own authority to make the choice of what I do or don't do. So, for example, in that, when the gastroenterologist said you have to do a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, and I said, is there any alternative? And he talked about the barium enema. And then I also went to my naturopath at the time and I said, what is your hunch? And he said, well, can you ask the doctor, can you ask them what they think they might find if they go in? Like, what's their hunch? What's their guess? And can you treat that as if you have it and see if your pain goes away? And so I asked the doctor, gastroenterologist. My mind was blanking. Like, I was thinking endocrinologist. I was like, that's not right. The gastroenterologist. That's another thing with medicine. They use these big words, right? Like they use fibromyalgia, which just means that you have pain all over your body. And they don't know why, and they don't know how to fix it. But it's essentially a manifestation of our trauma and our stress. But anyway, going back. So I went in and I asked the gastroenterologist, the GI doctor, what he thought it could be. And he said, potentially ulcers. And of course, he had a medication that he would give. But because I had such experience getting every symptom or every side effect of medication, I would take a medication to see if it would help me. And I would get so dizzy that I couldn't walk, I couldn't drive. It would make me fatigued. Some medications made me nauseous to the point where I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. There was no quality of life on these medications. So I asked the naturopath. So he says that I could have ulcers all through my intestines, which I confirm in observing. That's what I believe I have. And I said, so what would you suggest? And he talked about drinking bone broth to support the gut lining, the collagen, and taking some aloe and, diet and stuff. So I did that for a few weeks, and the pain that I had been experiencing in my intestine for over a year went away. So again, I listened to the gastroenterologist and the options, and I asked for options, and I listened. I think, of course, the naturopath wanted me to take some kind of supplement from him, and I chose what I did. So I was my own authority there. So that leads me to another point. I remember talking to a friend about this recently, and she said, that's so strange, Christine. Why did you think that you didn't have a choice in the medical system? You do. Of course you have a choice. Everyone knows you have a choice, kind of thing. That's so strange. And as I thought about it and I got to know my parts around it, what I explained to her was, yes, I understand now that I have a choice, but I absolutely didn't understand that before. And there are many reasons why. And I think there are probably many people like her. Maybe it depends kind of on upbringing and personality type, but there are also many people like me where we are conditioned again and again to follow authority. And there are big consequences if we don't, right? These people know better than you. You cannot trust yourself. A lot of this is religious indoctrination, right? Your heart is deceitful. Your flesh is weak. There's kind of a cultural burden that your body is your enemy and you've got to fix it. And the doctors are the ones who are going to do that. It's like this was just the air I breathed, water I swam in, and I didn't see any different until I had all of these these disconfirming experiences that said the doctors don't know. I remember the moment that illusion crumbled was the second time I was in the hospital. And I could not sleep. I was in so much turmoil, genuinely believing that I'm dying. And it's middle of the night. The lights are on outside. The nurses are laughing. And I had this epiphany that felt like terror in the moment. And I've had to go back and be with myself in that moment I had this epiphany of terror that they don't know how to help me and they don't truly care. How could they? Right? I'm the one experiencing this. I care about myself. My loved ones care about me. And while I'm not saying anything about ill motive of doctors and nurses, they can't possibly care about my life in the way that I do and my loved ones do. And so I've got to figure this out, or I've got to listen to my body and make choices for myself. Yes, I can take in the knowledge and the expertise of others, but I ultimately need to make the decision because I care the most. So even after that, they were constantly giving me antibiotics and then antifungal and all of these things. And I remember going to one of the hundreds of doctors I went to see, and there's a nurse practitioner. And I mean, she saw me. My parents had to literally like carry me in to her office. And she was like, "You do not look good. What's going on?" And I explained, "I'm on this antibiotic and this med and this antifungal and this and this." She said, "Oh, that's too much." And I explained all the side effects. And she says, "It sounds like you have a highly sensitive system, or you're a highly sensitive person." And I remember at first taking offense to that. I thought that she was insulting me by saying you're a highly sensitive person, because when I grew up, I was constantly ridiculed and mocked for being too sensitive. So I thought she was saying, this is a problem with you, kind of thing. But I went home that day and I looked up highly sensitive person. That's when I found Elaine Aron's work on highly sensitive persons. And I began to say, yes, this is me. And there's a subset of the population that is highly sensitive, who their system will react extremely to medications and procedures that maybe other people's systems do not react to, right? So whenever other people say, "Oh yeah, I got a colonoscopy, I got this surgery, I'm taking these 5 meds and it's helping me and I'm doing well," I'm fully supportive. I'm like, "That's great. That's great for you. I'm so happy that it's helping you and supporting you. And I would never tell you to not do something that supports you, that you have evidence is helping you." But my experience is different. I have a very highly sensitive system. So later on, when a certain jab was said, everyone has to get this, I knew that my system and the system of a portion of the population would have a reaction, would have a really hard time with that. And it had nothing to do with political alignment at all. And so it was a real disappointment for my system to find that at the time, the political party I aligned with called me evil and on the other side and the enemy, because I was making choices to protect my own very sensitive system. So again, that was another period where I got a lot of hate. And my goal is not to say everybody needs to not get the jab or everybody needs to do what I do. I want everyone to have the freedom and the autonomy to listen to their own body, to observe their own experiences, to make mistakes and say, "Hey, I was wrong," to try things, to take in information, to have experiments, but to ultimately have an experiment of one where they can make choices for their own body and their own experience. So, and I don't think I wanted to finish what I was saying about why I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was so full of inner critics that didn't trust me, and people-pleasing parts, fawning parts, codependent parts that later, when I got to know them through IFS, told me if I displease a person in front of me, if I disobey, right, I'm going to die. I'm going to have excruciating pain from shame. I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be rejected, abandoned. I mean, this was acted as such an incredibly huge deterrent. So even if the people outside of me maybe wouldn't have, as an adult, given too much backlash, though there was backlash in making my own choices, which I can go into. But even if that wasn't there, there was this inner dynamic that of cultural burden, religious burden, experiences of not pleasing the person in front of me or the authority in front of me and being harmed, hit, punished, shamed, right? So it feels like there's not a choice. If I don't do what this authority is telling me to do, I will be punished. That's what the parts inside genuinely felt. So those parts needed to be healed and reparented and retrieved into the present, to no longer fear that, and then truly feel autonomy and choice and empowerment and agency, right? I can say no to the doctor. No, I'm not going to do this. So I was going to say the backlash on the outside. Since then, I've had several things where I'll have really painful abscess. I had back pain for a couple months that was debilitating. And the people around me who still think that the doctors and the hospitals and stuff are the savior and they have the answers, and essentially you have to go to them. And I get that that's what they're convinced of, and they mean well, they love me, they don't want me to hurt, they don't want me to have harm come to me, and the doctor's the savior, why wouldn't you go to them? They would essentially stage these interventions. They would get together and say, Christine, you have to go to the hospital. You have to go to the doctor. And each time my body would heal itself. I would support the safety of my body. I would give it rest. I would give it fluid. I would give it whatever it needed. And I don't want to get into gory details, but the abscess grew and was a lot of pain, burst, and was and healed. Another really great resource actually for me during these times was YouTube, because you actually have a huge wide array of people's experiences. And you can say, oh, this happened for this person. And when they had that, this was the course of healing that the body had, right? It inflamed, it increased in pain, it discharged, and then it healed, right? And so this is the stage I'm in right now. I can trust my body. And that's exactly what happened. And this is how to support it. And then I would have people who would mock me and say, oh, you're going to find your medical advice on YouTube? And I would say, mm-hmm. But I'm not making YouTube my authority, just like I'm not making the doctor my authority. I'm taking in tons of really valuable experiences and information. And then I'm looking at my experience and saying, what choice do I want to make? And I take ownership of it. So then also when I had the back pain, so many people were telling me, you have to go to the doctor, you have to go to the physical therapist, you have to get x-rays, you have to have a surgery. And I watched a bunch of different people's opinions on YouTube, some that said you're going to have to take pain meds the rest of your life. You have to get surgeries, and others who said, when you have a herniated disc or a dislocated disc in your back, it takes about 12 weeks for it to heal. And you kind of have to wait it out. You are going to be in pain. And you need to alter your lifestyle and your life, which I understand a lot of people do not feel like they can do. right? I have to go to work. I have to care for my kids. I don't have the luxury, so I have to get this surgery to fix it, right? But I was able to do that. I was able to support my back in ways I didn't sleep on my stomach for a couple months. I did look up physical therapy exercises. I experimented with them. Some of them absolutely made the pain worse, and I stopped doing them. And I can't imagine going to an authority, a doctor, a physical therapist, and them saying, you have to do this. And those parts of me that want to be rule followers and compliant, doing those and causing myself pain. But in this way, I was able to say no, and maybe that's what a lot of people feel like they have the choice to do. But my kind of compliant inner good girl would really resist saying no. But I was able to say, not going to do that. And I found the exercises that really helped me. I also bought a bunch of these different gadgets and pillows. Vast majority of them didn't help whatsoever, but one of them did. And then it's funny, I used it religiously. And then it got to a point where the pain was gone and I kept using it and it started causing me pain. So I had to listen to my body and adjust and say, okay, my body doesn't need this anymore. And then there's the whole question of mind body pain, which I have a whole 4-part series on chronic pain. And I mean, it has shown up for me in every possible way. Like I said, bladder pain, vaginal pain, intestinal pain, migraines, panic attacks, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. The list goes on and on. And so I would have the symptom imperative, where if one thing ended, another symptom would come, so that I always had something to fixate on, essentially to distract me from emotional pain or parts that believed I deserved and needed to have pain to pay for wrongs that I had done. And so using IFS, using mind body work to somatically track, bring safe, messages of safety to my system was helpful. And then ultimately getting at the roots through IFS and healing the parts that were doing what they thought was a helpful thing for me. So again, I'm not saying that there are not cases where there is a physical cause to our pain or there is a structural physical issue, but there's a huge array of things that are a response to trauma and mental emotional stress. Our parts will tell us exactly what it is. If our thinking figured out parts will give space for them to speak directly. But that whole realm of how trauma affects the body, how the mind affects the body, is not understood in the medical world. And I know this video is getting very long. I just want to say 2 more things. Another thing that I recognized and saw was how I have parts who have a particular distrust, I think, for pharmaceutical companies, and only because there does seem to be a really clear drive for profit. And I understand that, right? Everyone, I think, has good intention to protect themselves, right? To gain sustenance and safety and security for themselves and their families. And so I don't think they're bad people. But ultimately, when the motive, the bottom line, the drive is for profit, it would be an illusion for me to believe that they have my best interest at heart. Kind of like the doctors and nurses, there was nothing wrong with them. They just couldn't possibly want the best for me as much as I did for myself. So those, I needed to withdraw trust pretty completely from pharmaceutical companies, since it's almost humorous to me when I watch these commercials where they're advertising these chemicals that people put in their body that can have hugely terrible effects, that they explicitly list all kinds of deadly things. And yet they still, I think people still take them because they think either, oh, that won't happen to me, or, well, the doctor is the authority and they think the risk is worth the reward or whatever. And again, that's their choice. If it is helping people, I am all for it. But I want people to feel empowered to say no, to find alternatives, to really listen to their body and not think I'm the problem, right? And again, a lot of that takes a lot of deeper inner work. So I always want to leave with something practical or something, I guess my suggestions of in an ideal world, changes maybe that might happen in the medical realm. Um, One is what I've been saying. It's just that doctors would be trained and understand the mind-body connection. Now, my distrusting part is saying that is not in the best interest of pharmaceutical companies and the medical establishment, because if people understood themselves holistically and doctors understood that, and they could prescribe going home and taking off work and getting rest and eating well, lifestyle changes, getting some movement, getting in the sun, and that were to solve their issues, um, the businesses would be out of business. And so it's not in their best interest to let people know that. That's why I want to spread this message, because I want to empower. That's the thing that I want, is to empower patients, to let them know you have many options and it is your choice. I think that needs to be explicitly said repeatedly, repeatedly. And maybe you have a doctor that does that, and that's wonderful, but I've had many doctors that don't. Let's see. Yeah, and promote lifestyle changes, like I said, not just push a prescription for a pill or procedure. And the last thing is to test or to trust timeless, natural healing methods. And I want to say real quick too, part of the holistic lifestyle and, promoting that is inner trauma work, because that's a root of all of this. And so that's a big thing also to encourage. And not necessarily things that people have to pay a lot of money for. That's why I'll bring it full circle. I am a proponent of IFS Buddy, because if this can help people get to the root of their trauma and heal it and help it, when they can't afford a therapist that costs $100, $150 an hour, I'm all for that. I want people to get the help they need, and they don't have to be economically, in the middle class or above, right? They can get whole foods to eat. They can get green trees and nature. They can go on the internet, on YouTube, and watch things. They can meditate. They can use IFS Buddy and do their inner trauma work. I was about to say something else. Oh yeah, timeless kind of natural cures. There are so many things that, like when I had the abscess, I used steam. I used certain plants, right? That have been used for thousands and thousands of years. In our current modern medicine, people question it like it's crazy. And they're like, that's antiquated. And I understand if it's something new that's, being pushed, you need to buy this protein powder, or you need to buy, again, I'm always a little bit leery of anything that's pushing profit. I want to question that. It could be that it's something helpful to me, but it might be something totally unnecessary. I don't need to take all these supplements. If I can go outside regularly and get vitamin D from the sun, that is going to be far superior to taking a pill. Now, if I live somewhere where I don't have exposure to the sun for long periods of time, I may want to take a vitamin D pill, right? So again, it's weighing things. How can I get something more naturally? right? I realized I needed to repopulate my gut with probiotics. It's always going to be superior to get natural probiotics from yogurt, from kimchi, sauerkraut, those things, if I can. If I can't, maybe I'll take a pill. But if I can do it naturally, let me try that first, because it's going to have less side effects. It's going to be more direct and effective. So that's something I wish the doctors would do. And I'll just say real quick too, one other little quick story. I remember going to the gynecologist, and the gynecologist saying, I went, it was crazy. I would go every month and they would give me a new vaginal antibiotic, because it was this cycle where the antibiotic, I would have bad bacteria, the antibiotic would kill it, but it would also kill the good bacteria, which made me a host for bad bacteria. I would get bad bacteria again, and they just kept prescribing it to me. So I remember asking the gynecologist, how long are we going to do this? Am I going to have to take an antibiotic for the rest of my life? Like, there has to be a way to get off the antibiotic and to repopulate my bacteria. And she was telling me to take, I said, can I take some probiotics? And she's like, well, sure, if you want to. And I had heard about putting a probiotic up there where the bacteria are. So I tried that. And I remember going there and her pulling this probiotic pill out and just shaming me in front of the nurse and saying, oh my goodness, do not do this. And she was very condescending about it. And then before I left her office, I said, because I had read about boric acid pills and that you also put up there. And I said, what about that? Because many doctors are very, very adamant about the research. It has to be proven in a clinical study kind of thing. And she said, oh, actually, there are clinical studies. So the only reason why she was upset about the probiotic is there was no proof that it worked. Well, for me, I'm an experiment of one. If it works for me, I'm happy. It doesn't have to work for everybody. But she said with the boric acid, oh, yes, actually, there have been studies that is highly effective, equal to antibiotics. It basically creates the right pH for the system to be hospitable to good bacteria and not bad bacteria. And I was shocked. I thought, well, one, thank you so much for admitting that. But two, why? Why wouldn't you tell women about this? Instead of having them purchase and get on these antibiotics constantly. So I went and I did a boric acid treatment, and my vaginal infection that I had had for about a year went away, and never came back. And again, I'm not saying that this is what will work for you, right? But be okay to experiment for yourself, even if they say, well, there hasn't been any studies on it. That's okay. There's all kinds of issues I have with medical studies as well, but I won't go into that. There's so much I could say on this topic, and I hope that you take what I'm saying with I want to present it with humility. That again, this is my experience. The intention of the parts who are sharing is that you will feel empowered, and you will feel like I can make choices for myself. And I can observe my body, I can listen to my body, I can support my body in whatever way I see is helpful to me, whether that's taking this pill or doing this lifestyle change or this supplement or whatever it is, or none of the above. Thank you. If you're still here and you've listened to this whole rant, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you have anything to add, any comments, or if you have any questions about my experience or my opinions, you are welcome to leave them in the comments below.